Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Uh, I feel that I'm something like an ugly duckling among beautiful swans because I specialize in history of early modern Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, especially political thought and political culture of the Polish nobles in the 16th and 17th century, and I have never systematically investigated disastrous events in Polish or European history, so I'm not much competent to make a sufficiently original and solid study on the history of extreme disasters. But just sometimes I come across upon the descriptions which touched on climatic changes or natural disasters when I study historical sources, including diaries, memoirs, letters, chronicles, and literary works, in order to explore the early modern Polish culture. In my presentation, I would like to try to present some examples of such historical documents from 17th century Poland, which tell us how Polish people observed and described extraordinary natural phenomena. 17th century is generally called by historians the period of the general or the global crisis. The crisis of the 17th century is one of the most controversial and persistent subject matters in the contemporary historiography. The discussion began some 60 years ago and remains lively today. Many historians from different countries have taken part in the discussion, and controversy took on the international character. The debate on the crisis began from the article of famous historian Alec Hobsbawm, published in Past and Present in 1954. Hobsbawm argued that the European economy had passed through a general crisis during the 17th century, and this crisis had been the late phase of the general transition from a feudal to a capitalist economy. 5 years later, opposing to this thesis, Hugh Trevor Roper argued that the crisis of the 17th century essentially had been a crisis of political system, which he called Renaissance state. In this stage, the dispute on the 17th century crisis was a polemic between the socio-economic and the political interpretation of European history. Later, the crisis debate was globalized and interdisciplinarized. Historians found out many signs of the crisis all over the world, not only in Europe, but also Near East or in East Asia. And they began to regard the climatic factors as important for explaining the global characteristics of this crisis. Already in the 1960s, economic historians pointed out that the price of grains had risen everywhere in Europe, including Poland, in the middle of the 16th century. here. And in Lvov, then the city of the Polish kingdom, the price of the oats went up by about 10 times only in 10 years of the middle of the 17th century. It was caused by bad harvests, continuing for several years in the second half of the 1640s and resulted in a quite critical situation for ordinary people. Nowadays, historians tend to think that the crop failure of the middle of the 17th century correlated closely with the climatic changes of the Little Ice Age. The summer temperatures in the northern hemisphere were relatively low throughout the 17th century, especially in the 6040s. Scholars point out that these lower summer temperatures show a striking correlation with the degrees of sunspot activity, the so-called Maunder minimum, and the increase of volcanic activity in the middle of the century. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, a vast composite state of East Central Europe, which extended its territory over present Poland, Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine, confronted with serious political and military crises exactly in the middle of the 17th century. Henryk Sienkiewicz, a Polish writer of the 19th century, named this critical period the Deluge. In 1648, the Ukrainian Cossacks and peasants rose in revolt against Polish ruling class. Then they approached close in the central part of the Polish kingdom in the beginning of the 1650s. Corresponding with the Ukrainian revolt, the Russian army invaded the Commonwealth from eastern border to the central part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. And after that, in 1655, the Swedish army made invasions from two directions. The most part of the country was occupied by foreign armies, and the Polish king sought refuge outside his kingdom temporarily. The Polish society suffered heavy damage also in demographic dimension. In Gdansk, the most populous city of the Polish kingdom, the number of the dead increased up to about twice as many as the number of the births in the 1650s. The series of military failures shocked the inhabitants of the Polish-Lithuanian state, especially the Polish nobles. They took a pen and put their uneasy experiences on record in diaries or memoirs. Through these documents, we can get to know how the contemporaries recognized their own crisis and how they reacted to it. On the climate change of the 17th century, we have various kinds of proxy data. Geoffrey Parker, a renowned British historian and the author of the most synthetic book on the global crisis, classifies these data into two categories, the natural archive and the human archive. The former category includes the data from ice caps and glaciers, pollen and spores deposited in lakes and bogs, the size of growth lengths of trees, etc. The latter category, the human archive, comprises narrative information and written documents, numerical information extracted from documents, pictorial representations of natural phenomena, epigraphic or archaeological information, and instrumental data on weather regularly recorded by some observers, and so on. My presentation will take into consideration only the human archive. The historical materials from the Polish Human Archive can be divided into 3 categories. First, the descriptions of climate in the documents on everyday life, diaries, memoirs, letters, newspapers, and broadsheet, etc. Second type, narratives of extraordinary natural phenomena, chronicles, history, and literary works. And third type is records of systematic observation of natural phenomena, data of astronomical observations. In the following part, I will show you some historical materials, mainly narrative documents, part of which will include pictorial representations and instrumental data. Jan Antoni Chlapowicki, Polish nobleman, more strictly, exactly speaking, he is a Lithuanian nobleman speaking and writing in Polish language. He wrote a diary from 1656 to 85. This valuable document is only partly resolved in its original manuscript, which include the descriptions from 1656 to 64. As for the rest part, we have only its copy by a copyist by the 18th century. This diary is very interesting for us because the diarist wrote comments on weather almost every day. I show you some examples from his diary of the first 10 days of November. This is the first page of his diary and started from January 1st, 1656, Novelato, New Year, Mróz Srogi, strong frost. So, and for example, I quote weather descriptions from his diary in November 58, 1st November, a day of unsettled weather, cold and sometimes rainy, and next day, fine day cool, heavy frost, bright sky, and so on. So, and I translated the Polish word mróz as frost in English because it means a temperature below 0 in contemporary Polish language. If this word was used in the same meaning in the 17th century, it may suggest that in this year, the season of the frozen temperature came relatively early, in the beginning of November. However, it is not sure that Chlapowicki used the word mróz in the same way as contemporary Polish speakers. In the descriptions of these 10 days, there are some information of rainfalls, but no mention on snowfall. The first mention of a snowfall appeared on 15th November. In the night, snow fell and covered the ground. It was a little freezing, he writing in this way. All his comments on weather are qualitative informations. When we quantify them, it will be needed careful investigation into the meaning of each word which Rapowitsky used for describing climatic phenomena. Some Polish scholars tackled this difficult task and concluded that the temperature in the period between 1656 and 67 had been relatively lower, not only in comparison with the present circumstances, but also when we compare it with the latter period of Lapowitsky's lifetime. Another Polish nobleman, Mikołaj Jemiałowski, wrote a memoir on the years 1648 to 79. He recorded heavy damage on the farm produced by insects in 1648 as follows. Before the invasion of the Cossacks into this region after the defeat in Piławice, locusts in countless numbers flew from Ukraine. They ate up grains in Volhynia and its surrounding areas. It resulted in rising the price because there had been no harvest in this winter. It is characteristic that Jemiałowski narrated the disaster by locusts from Ukraine and the invasion of the Ukrainian Cossacks in the same context. He regarded the natural disaster in the same light as the political and the military failure. People sometimes reacted against a bad harvest by the unreasonable weather violently. Krzysztof Opaliński, a Polish nobleman and the author of satirical poems, described the witchcraft caused by the crop failure as follows. When the spring came and May went by without a drop of rain, it was caused by witches. When oxen or other livestock died one after another, witches were responsible to it. People demand to seize innocent women and put them to torture. An executioner tortures them by giving their hands and feet and burns them. Opaliński's description, which he inserted his satire on the burdens on the oppression of the peasants in Poland, indicates his critical eyes upon the superstitious belief of the ordinary people on natural phenomena. As compared with it, the view of nature in Nova Gigantomachia, a chronicle of the siege warfare of the Jasnogóra monastery in Częstochowa in 1655, written by Augustine Koldecki, was prescribed more directly by a belief in divine providence. In the beginning of November 1655, the Swedish army marched on Częstochowa and began to besiege Jasnogóra monastery. Swedish army. And the monastery owed its prestige to the icon of the Black Virgin Mary, which had been the object of worship for its miraculous qualities. The Swedish forces were not successful in seizing the fortified monastery and withdrew from Częstochowa near the end of 1655. Augustine Koldecki, the prior of the Pauline monastery in Jasnogóra, recorded the progress of the siege of his monastery by Swedish army and published it under the title of Nova Gigantomachia. The narrative of Nova Gigantomachia begins with ill omens in the previous year before the Swedish invasion. In February 1654, the monastery was struck by lightning and the tower was burned in a fire. In June of the same year, an unusual phenomenon was observed in the sky. The author describes an extraordinary change that occurs on the face of the sun as follows. On the nose of the sun, there was a cross, which changed into a heart. It was pressed by a sword, leaned to the left side of the face of the sun and took the position under the eye, etc. This part is accompanied by an illustration that corresponds to the text exactly. It is characteristic that another description with illustration of the unusual change of the sun appears in the last part of Nova Gigantomachia. In March 1657, the Polish king Jan Kazimierz and the queen Ludovica Maria came to Yasnagura in order to hold an extraordinary convocation of the senators with the representative of the nobility. According to Nova Gigantomachia, then the king and the queen took spades and dug the ground to build new defense moats and walls on their own initiative. As a few days after their departure from the monastery, an extraordinary phenomenon appeared in the sky. In Passion Sunday, in the south, a triple sun appeared, and we saw double corona of the sun, etc. Here, the sign in the sky proves that the success of the defending battle of Yasnagura and the favorable turn of the war as a war was brought by the power of God. These two descriptions and these illustrations show us the framework of narrative of Nova Gigantomachia. The history of siege of Yasnagura Monastery begins with an ill omen and ends with a good sign in the sky. The author describes both meteorological incidents as a sign of the divine providence. In the same period, we can find a person with a more secular and scientific attitude to natural phenomena on the coast of the Baltic Sea. His name is Jan Hevelius. He was one of the most active astronomers, not only in Poland, but also in all Europe of the 17th century. He lived and kept a brewery in Gdansk, the city which then had the largest population in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. He invested the profits from his brewery in building the astronomical observatory in his house. Hevelius made astronomical observations systematically and published the result. He also corresponded with friends interested in the same subject and shared information with each other. It is important for us that he recorded He recorded the data of 4,186 sunspot observations from 6042 to 6084. His observations were made in the period of the Maunder minimum, when sunspots became exceedingly rare. Some contemporary solar scientists use Hevelius's data for verifying the level of the low sunspot activity in the Maunder minimum. In this case, we can obtain relatively homogeneous and objective data by instrumental observations from the sources which were recorded in 17th century Poland. There are various documents there are various documents which gave evidence to the climatic change in 17th century Poland. People showed deep interest in observing and recording natural phenomena because they experienced serious natural and human disasters, especially in the middle of this century. They interpreted the meaning of the changes of natural environment according to their own framework of understanding. Excepting the case of Hevelius, many of the human archive documents are subjective descriptions of climatic phenomena, which are difficult to suit to the quantification. Most people understood the meaning of the climatic change according to an already existing traditional framework of recognition. On the other hand, some amateur observers, like Hevelius, began to search natural phenomena in an innovative way. It was also a reaction to the global crisis in an intellectual sphere. Through analyzing the historical documents of astronomical objects and climatic events, we can know how people of 17th century Poland reacted to the global crisis. Also, we can understand how the framework of recognition of natural phenomena was constructed historically and was transformed into a more scientific way of thinking through the experiment of the global crisis of the 17th century. Thank you for your attention.